Hi, everyone. My name is Megan O'Rourke, and I am the Associate Dean and Coordinator of Midwest Recruitment at Providence College. I am the admission counselor that works with the entire Midwest for PC. I live up in the Chicagoland area, but I'm actually originally from St. Louis. So I am thrilled to be here with you all today for your virtual college planning program. Hopefully the sessions today will have you feeling a lot better, feeling less stressed. I know that this can be a stressful time. Students are typically somewhat anxious about the application process. And I think it's because there's just a lot of unknowns. Know that you've got people like me across the country and across the world that are here to help answer questions about our respective institutions as you navigate this process. Sound good? What I am here to talk to you all today about is the essay. Now, let me preface this by saying that not every school is going to require an essay as part of their application, but the schools that do really do utilize the information you provide as a kind of part of the overall process in terms of the review of what we are looking for in the students. Now, to give you a little bit of background, I have worked for 3 different institutions, all private schools, who have all used essays as part of their application. And I think for me, it's my favorite part of the application to read. It's so cool to be able to learn more about the students, to get the context about them and who they are and their story. This is really the place where students have the ability to make an impact. A lot of what we are collecting is stuff that already exists, right? An SAT or an ACT score potentially, the letter of recommendation, that's kind of like your third-party endorsement from a teacher. Your academic record is what it is at this point. It's through the end of junior year. So when you're applying as a senior in first semester, this is really the place for you to be able to kind of give us that additional information. I'm going to walk you through some tips and tricks, kind of what to expect, how we use it, and give you a little bit of information about the common application as well, because I think that's helpful in the context of what you'll be considering in terms of how you apply. So hopefully that helps too as you get closer and closer to the application process, which for the juniors that are joining us today, that'll pretty much start this summer, and it's already March. So let's get this kicked off. I've got some slides that I'm going to share with you today just to kind of keep us on track and have some visual examples. I am a visual person, so hopefully this helps as we kind of think about the essay and how to put all of that together. So let's take a look at the some of the things that you'll need to know about the essay. For me, one of the first questions that I usually receive about the essay is kind of, what is the point of it, or why do schools require it? And if a school requires it, it's your chance and our opportunity to learn something that we aren't going to get in another part of the application. We have your grades. So we'll be able to see your transcript from Kirkwood, and that will show us, what kind of school Kirkwood is. We'll have that kind of background information, what kinds of classes are available, what were you able to take versus what did you take, and how did you do, right? But that already exists. That's kind of already completed by the time that you apply. We'll have what you're doing outside of class, how you spend your time, that letter of rec, like I mentioned, your test scores if a school is going to require them, and then this piece. And I think for me, this is your chance to showcase something about you that we aren't getting in one of those other areas. So we just finished at Providence College our regular decision application review. And I had this student, very studious, very smart, looking to study science as a major, and had a lot of kind of related activities and involvement with kind of some of the more academic clubs at their school, and then wrote a really funny, delightful essay about Dungeons and Dragons. Now, is every student going to be able to pull this off? Maybe not. But I think it was such an unexpected surprise to see this student talking about something that they are very passionate about, where I would not have seen that in any other part of the application. And that's just one example. I've seen great essays about learning how to cook or learning how to bake, and the student is very interested in business, for example. So it's just a great way for us to kind of give your application personality. It gives us that background. And so students think a little bit about the topic and what you might want to share with us. For the parents that are joining, I think the automatic assumption is that it has to be kind of formatted like an English paper would, right? Like that introductory paragraph, the 3 body paragraphs to support the intro, and a conclusion of some kind. And I have seen songs, I've seen poems, I've seen short stories, I've seen almost like scripts. So there's a little bit of creativity that can come into this. And I think students can and should be creative, should that be something that they are interested in doing. It does not have to follow the traditional format of an English paper. Now, that said, it inherently is an English exercise. So spelling and grammar and all of that stuff counts, and it does matter. But I think students can kind of flex their creative muscles when it comes to how they put it together. So let's talk a little bit about the essay and how it kind of fits into the application. I've mentioned the transcript, the test scores, the activity list, the essay, and the letters of recommendation. So how are all of these things reviewed, and what kind of a part or how big of a part does the essay play in the overall review? And I would say outside of academics, that this is probably at the top of the list in terms of qualitative information. To me, this is a way for us to get that context. Practically speaking, and just to give you like a little bit of background about the school that I work for, we have about 12,000 students who apply to Providence College every year. Are my colleagues and I meeting every single one of those 12,000 applicants? We are not. It's not possible. And so I think one of the things that we can utilize this information then is an introduction to you and getting all of the pieces to the puzzle, so that when we sit down to read your application, even though we haven't officially met you face to face, we can meet you in a way through the application. Academics, that's going to be the most important thing, regardless of where you apply. But I think this becomes kind of second or third most important in the context of all of those things that I've mentioned. So it is worth it to sit down and take some time with it. I usually encourage students to start thinking about this over the summer, because you've got a little bit of free time, hopefully, and can be more relaxed in the way that you brainstorm and kind of work to put this all together. So let's talk about what a good essay looks like, because I think that's another thing that comes up in a lot of the conversations that I have. And in my 17 years in admission, or 16 years or whatever it is, I have read thousands of essays, and I can tell you that there are, there's not going to be one topic that works for everybody, and there's not going to be one structure or format that works for everybody, but there certainly are going to be some thematic things that do work amongst all of these essays. An interesting or unique hook, an engaging first sentence. Now, in your brainstorming, that's probably not the first sentence that you will put on paper. It might even be in the middle or towards the end of the essay that you write. But I think what is most important to recognize is, by taking time and doing the brainstorming and doing all of that extra work, you can land on a sentence where, me as the reader, I'm saying, oh my gosh, I want to read more. This is such a cool topic. I can't wait to dig into what this student has to say. I read a really great essay. I had another science student who wrote a great essay about learning how to bake, and how they struggled at first in their baking skills until they realized baking is a lot of chemistry. And because they love their chemistry classes, some sort of like light bulb moment occurred, and they really kind of kicked it into high gear and started to bake for family and friends, and even kind of made it a little bit of a side job, side hustle, if you will. And I think for me, this is a great example of this into, through, and beyond. And for those that are like, wait, kind of, what does that mean? Or can you explain that more? The into, in this example that I just shared with you, is this idea of this student kind of struggling to bake, or feeling like they bake stuff and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. The through is that light bulb aha moment. And the beyond is, now I'm this awesome baker, and I bake for family and friends, and have kind of turned it into this little side gig kind of thing. I think for me, this is a way to kind of organize your thoughts. And so I will show you in the next couple of slides the Common App essay prompts. And for those that aren't familiar, the Common Application is a generalized college application. There are, I think at this point, over 1,000 schools across the country that will accept the Common App. So it's a little bit longer, but a lot of schools accept it. And the questions, they're a little bit more directed, still broad enough that you'll be able to find space in one of them to write something that you're interested in. But they're multi-part. And for me, we want the kind of what happened before, how are you doing now, and what did you learn, right? Into, through, and beyond. I think this also gets to this last point on the slide, is answering all of the parts of the question. And you'll see what I mean when I pull the Common App essay prompts up. Oftentimes, students will get stuck in writing, this is this thing that happened to me. And then we kind of lose out as a reader on, this is why this means something to me. This is what I learned from it. And this is why I've decided, of all of the things that I could have written about, to write this thing and share it with you. So keep that in mind. These, regardless of how you structure or format your essay, these are going to be things that I would encourage you to think about as you navigate writing your college essay. Okay. So here we go. Here are these Common App prompts. And like I said, I think there's, there are so many schools that will accept this application. It is longer versus a school who has said, here is our own version of an application, which is going to be shorter and probably a little bit faster to fill out, but it's just going to that one place, where this application could be going to all 5 or 6 of the places that you apply. So there's benefits to both, and you'll have to weigh those out as you kind of cultivate your list of schools that you'll apply to. But when you get to Common App, these are the essay questions that they had last year, and surprise, these are the essay questions you will have, juniors, for the upcoming year, which is so great that they are already kind of out there and you can see them and maybe even start thinking about them. So as I mentioned, these are multi-part questions, and I always like to use number 2 as my example here. The lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? So there's actually, in one question, it's 3 questions, right? So recount a time where you faced a challenge. That's the first part. The second part is how it affected you. And the third part is what you learned, right? So you're having to answer 3 things. I think the automatic inclination for a lot of the students that I work with, I do a lot of essay workshops at high schools all throughout the Midwest. And I think one of the automatic inclinations is to spend a lot of time on the recounting part. So when we look at this 3-part question, spending a lot of time on part 1, and then they realize like 2/3 of the way through, oh, I only have so much room, I need to get to parts 2 and 3, and then they're rushed and they're short and they aren't as in-depth or as thoughtful as they could be. Now, keep in mind, the Common Application has a word count. So the minimum is 250 words and the maximum is 650 words, which when you think about it, especially for the students watching, that's not a lot of space. It's like 1 page basically. And so I think for you all, as you're considering these questions, they're pretty open-ended. Like for some of you, you might want, okay, I want the prompt and I'm going to write from the prompt. Others of you might be better suited to just start writing something and realize that you can match it back up with one of these topics after the fact. There's no right or wrong answers here. There's no right or wrong ways to learn or to design this essay. It's really how your brain works best. So use your strengths here, utilize how your brain works best, and kind of work from there. I will say this though, that the one theme that runs through these 7 questions, the one word that all of these prompts have in common is the word you. So the focus should be on you, regardless of what you talk about. If it's an event, if it's another person, just make sure that we are focused on you. One of the newest questions in this list is number 4, and that's a question about gratitude. I will tell you this, in my experience, this year, there were not a lot of students that wrote that topic. And that's the other question that I will get when I show these on the screen. Students will say, okay, but which ones get written about the most and which ones don't? And that is the one that's usually at the bottom of the list. And I don't know if it's because it's new or if it's maybe a little bit too nebulous to think about, but I would encourage you, if you've got gratitude in your life, this is a great way to share it. Now, that said, you can probably guess just by reading them which ones pop up more often. Numbers 1, 2, and 7 are probably more popular than the others when it comes to this list, but that doesn't mean you can't write about those things. I think what's really key here is authenticity. Being authentic to who you are is the most important thing. So my Dungeons and Dragons student, they were being authentic to themselves. And that fits into that 6th question, like a concept or a thing that you find so engaging, you lose track of time. I have read essays about card games, board games, puzzles, World War II historical battles, scary movies, music, all kinds of fun things. Baking, I think, has even come up a couple of times. So again, finding that thing that you feel like you want to share with us and utilizing that and finding a way to write about it, that's going to be key in these questions. But this isn't going to be the only kind of question that you encounter. This is the most common, which is why I always want to share it. But like I mentioned, some schools have their own version of an application. So you might come across other options or things, other essay topics or prompts. So what else might you encounter? Personal statements. Now, people like me use these terms interchangeably, the essay and the personal statement. That's not a bad thing, but sometimes I think that can confuse students. This is an example of I don't know if this school still uses this specifically, but this was an example of a school's personal statement prompt. So a 1 to 2 page essay on a subject that interests you, and then the example that they give is like a person who's had influence on you, right? So a little bit broader in scope, but in the same vein as those Common App questions. So this might be something that you encounter. It could even be broader than this. It could just be write us a page or 2 about you. And then you kind of have to navigate how you decide what goes into that page. And that can be tricky, but again, some of these brainstorming things might help. Brainstorming activities might help you kind of focus your attention on what's going to be the most important thing to share. You also could come across what I call wild cards, which means some of these more random examples of more creative questions, okay? Now, for those that are familiar with the University of Chicago, it's a very competitive school here in the Chicagoland area, and they are known for their quirky essay questions. This is one of them. I don't think they still use this. This was one of them at the time. You can actually do a quick Google search and you will find they have plenty of options like this, but find X. And that's all the direction that you get. One of my favorites that they used to do is Where's Waldo? Again, there's no direction. So you are having to design an essay based on how you would specifically answer this question. How would you find X, or where is Waldo, right? Some of you are watching this presentation saying this sounds terrible. And that might mean that this school is not a good fit for you. But for those of you that are like, ooh, this is intriguing. I don't really know anything about this school, or this place is on my list, and I love the idea that they do stuff like this. This is going to be potentially a great fit for a school for you. So do some digging. They try to publicize their this is a supplemental essay that they have you write. So take a look and do some searches, and you'll be able to find some of the more recent examples that they have, because they're usually pretty fun, very interesting, very unique, and very quirky. Amherst at one point is giving you an example of 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Like an optimist and a pessimist, if you will, and how to write, who do you agree with and why, right? So it's not just answering, which one you agree with, but why, and getting into the why, right? That's That's going to be a big part of it. And then my personal favorite is this last one. So, what is page 217 of your 300-page autobiography? What a cool way to kind of share what you think your life could turn into. What a cool thing to be able to come back to, 20 years after you've written it to see where you've landed. I love the idea of this one. And again, this isn't for everyone. Creativity wise, you might be saying, Megan, this is not for me. And that's okay. These are the kinds of questions you will encounter at certain schools. And that kind of showcases what they think is important, or the kinds of things that they value in terms of the essay or supplemental essay. And so think about that as you think about what kinds of schools might be the right fit for you. Okay. This is one that you will encounter probably more often than some of those wild cards, is why our school? So, why Providence? We do not use this. We could, I suppose, but there are places out there that do utilize this question of why, insert school name here, and why us. And I used to work at an institution that did offer an essay like this, an essay question. To me, this is your chance to showcase your research that you've done. So if you encounter this question, I would say there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, if you visited, make sure that you share that information. Two, highlight that research that you've done. But three, I think this is your chance to kind of connect two things in your essay: what the school offers, what you want, and how that school can provide you those things, right? I think this is such a great way to say, like, you have all of these wonderful things that I am very interested in. And I know because I have this interest as a major, or I want to pursue this kind of career path, I know that I can take advantage of X, Y, and Z. And those things are available to me and will help me reach my goal. For me, the school that I worked for previously, Marquette University, which is up in Milwaukee, we had this question. I don't think they use it any longer, but one of the things that used to come up is I would come to basketball games all the time growing up. While that might be true, and that's fun and great, and we love that you have school spirit, that should not be the focal point of the essay. So if you are applying to a school that has, a storied sports program, and they are asking you this question, you can certainly include that, but make sure to include other components that showcase that research that you've done and how it's kind of connected to your goals and objectives as you try to find the next place that you'll call home, right? So keep that in mind as you think about that question. One thing that I like to touch on that is not necessarily specific to the essays, but I think is super important when it comes to stuff that you will write in the Common application, we're going to go back to Common App, is these two sections. So you at some point will create, if you're going to use Common App, you'll create a Common Application account, and you will see in the application these two sections. I will tell you right now that they are not required. And as an admission counselor, I am not expecting information to be in these sections. During the height of the pandemic, the community disruption section was used very frequently. It is now less frequently used, but it is not COVID specific. So we have had students from California who have applied, who were dealing with wildfires. That's a community disruption. There's a school here in the Chicago suburbs that the community that high school is in dealt with a shooting, a very public shooting over the 4th of July. And those students used this space, because that was a disruption in their community, to talk about that experience. This is not necessarily an area that needs to have something in it, but if something happened with the pandemic, or there was a community disruption of some kind that you feel like needs to go in this section, that is really what that should be used for. But again, we're not expecting to see anything in there. The same goes for additional information. It's not a required part of the application, but if there's something in your story that you do not feel like is represented amongst what we already have, this is a place and space to include that information. I have seen all kinds of stuff included in there. So I've had students that fill out the sibling section that have a couple extra siblings, and they want to make sure that they too are in the application, which is so cute to see. So they've included them in this section. Students then sometimes have talked about moving and that transition, you know, especially if they moved a far distance or something like that. I've seen that included there. Sometimes divorce, illnesses in the family, things like that. I often see that students will write about some of these topics as their essays, but you don't have to do that necessarily. So you do have this additional area to provide context, details, and information, and know that that is there. But again, it is not a required part of the application. So there are additional ways to kind of supplement your application with other components. And for some students, they don't want to talk about said thing in the essay. So they utilize this space, which does not have to be creative. It can be much more factual and just kind of to the point, because there's not a ton of room word count wise in these two areas. Okay. So let me talk to you a little bit about some tips and tricks in my time in admissions and kind of things to kind of keep in mind as you move into the spring and summer, which is such an important time in this college search process. So I think students get tripped up on this, and I don't mean to put this on here to stress you out, but staying away from the common. What I mean is this. I am of the mindset, and there are colleagues, my colleagues at PC and colleagues at other schools that will disagree with me on this. I inherently believe that there's not good or bad topics. It's how a student chooses to write about the topic. And this is where this can come from. So for me, some of the topics that we see that are pretty popular would be like athletic injuries, or making it to the district tournament, making it to the state tournament, that kind of thing, not getting the part in the play. What else do we see? Service trips. Those are another big one. Those to me are probably the kind of ones that come to mind in terms of common. That doesn't mean you can't write about those things. It's how you're choosing to frame the topic that matters. I actually read an essay from a student who had an athletic injury and who even like kind of paused in the middle of the essay to say, like, this isn't going where you think it's going, which made me laugh that they were self-aware enough to say that. It also was kind of a funny thing to see in an essay. And it turned into a conversation about two things. One, being a supporter of their teammates, right? They had always been a leader on the team, and now they were on the bench with that injury, and what that meant for their kind of mental state of mind, but also how they realized they could be a support to the people around them. And then in turn, how it turned into, because they had this injury, they then found another pathway with another activity and organization at their high school and got them really excited about being involved in that organization. So yeah, that was a great way to kind of spin that topic. I think if you are going to choose to write about an athletic injury or a service trip or whatever, just try not to make it like so formulaic. So a service trip ends up being kind of like a travel log, like this day we did this day we did that. Maybe instead try to focus on one specific part, what it meant to you and what you're taking away from that trip, right? I think that's how I would want you to think about topics as you navigate kind of bringing all of that together. This is one that usually gets a chuckle from students, right? From your scars, not your scabs, which kind of gross, but the way how I describe this hopefully will help you understand this. Something that is scabbed over is a newer, fresher injury of some kind, whereas a scar is something that you have moved past. There's probably a decent amount of time since you have received that scar that you can look back on with a little bit more clarity of purpose. This is exactly that. So if you are in the middle of something right now, it might not be the best topic to write about. So finding something where there's a little bit of time between now and when that situation, for example, for that situation occurred, that might be because there's time and there's growth and there's thoughtfulness to, okay, this thing happened to me and here's kind of what I learned from it. But if you're in the middle of it, you haven't necessarily learned from it, and there's not that same level of being able to kind of take a broader step back and say, okay, here's what happened and here's all of the information about it. Hopefully that makes sense. I get this question a lot. The idea of like picking a topic that's like big and important and dramatic or super sad, that's something that comes up all the time. It doesn't have to be the biggest story ever. One of the most delightful essays that I have ever read is about a student making chicken parmesan with her mom for their big Italian family on Sundays. That was like their family tradition. And so she talks about when she was like a little kid, she always wanted to use the knife and cut the chicken, which obviously we're not giving little kids knives. So she was like the breader of the chicken parmesan, right? And then as she got older, she got to do more and more and take on more responsibility, and how that's going to be like what college is. And it was heartwarming and a little bit sweet and a little bit sappy and a little bit sad or melancholy, I guess, sentimental, if you will, because the student is moving on to the next phase of their life, which is like such a cool and unique time. And she's present and aware of it in the context of having this great, wonderful, supportive family. So it can be something as simple as that. And I think if you want to be funny, you can be funny. But authenticity, like I mentioned before, is such a big thing here. So don't feel like you have to write this big, sad story, this big dramatic story. It can be something simple that just means something, means a lot to you. Okay. Now, this is something I always tell students. Once I've read their essay, does it pass the so what test? So what? So what of all of the things that you could have told me, why did you decide to tell me this? And I think if students have an answer, that is the right thing to write about. But sometimes they don't. And I would encourage them to think more broadly about, is this the right topic, or is there something else that I should share? So keep that in the back of your minds. So what? So what of all of the things that you could have told me about, why did you decide to tell me this thing? Okay. I think for me, like I've mentioned over and over, you can be funny. Don't be funny if you're not funny. Like, just be authentic to who you are. We want to learn more about you, and this is the way for us to be able to do that. I always tell students in this example, like, I'm not a really funny person. Like, I can get a good zinger in every now and again, but I'm not a funny person. And if I wrote a funny essay, it would feel forced. So being authentic to your personality is such an important part of this, and don't lose who you are for over editing or over analyzing of the topic. Okay. Now, these are just tips in my many years of working in college admission. Okay. Spell check is not a substitute for proofreading. So have a couple of people proofread for you. Maybe it's one of your siblings, maybe it's a parent, your English teacher, your counselor at school. Here's my thing about all of this. Don't over edit it. Don't when you decide to write this, I think proofreading is super important, but I don't want you to lose that sense of who you are for the sake of making it perfect. Okay. So keep that in the back of your mind so don't over edit it. Don't have too many people read it. I think 2 people is probably a good number. Surprise is good. Shock is not. We've seen plenty of essays that surprise us, that delight us, but shock typically is in a negative way. And that can mean a lot of things. That could be topics that are cause concern, or we have issues that the student, there could be harm in some way, or just concerns about all kinds of things. So surprise, good, shock, not. And write with your heart. I think that's the other thing where students and parents kind of wonder what the best route is. And I think, again, English exercise, yes, grammar, spelling, all of that stuff, important, but not the only thing. Okay. And I will say this, in my many years of working with students, this is such a unique time in your life. It is the one time in your life that you're going to go through all of this. Senior year, you only get to do it once. So be present in the moment, take advantage of all of the stuff happening around you, enjoy senior year, because you are the best that there is. And your parents are proud of you, and we are proud of you as admission counselors for taking this next step in your journey to becoming who you're supposed to be. It's not going to be easy at times, and it will feel stressful, but you've got so many great supports around you at school, with your friends, with your family. We are also here to help. So please be sure to utilize us as you go through this whole thing. Okay. So I will tell you this, I don't have a slide for it, but if you Google the college essay guy, he is a really delightful resource, and you can email me. So my contact information is on the screen. You can email me and I will send you his website. If you're like, we remember what you said, but we can't find it or whatever, just email me. I'm happy to help. But he has a lot of really fun and interesting brainstorming exercises and activities. So if you are nervous about this in any way, or just wanting a little bit of help or guidance, this is a great resource for you. It's all free. He's great in that. So College Essay Guy or the College Essay Guy, and you should be able to find him. I, like I said, am the person that works with the Midwest from Providence College, and I would be happy to help if you have any questions specifically about my school, or if you just have questions in general about the essay or the application process. I've been doing this a long time, and I am of the mindset that I want to be a resource for families, and I want to be able to help families as they navigate through to this next step of and phase of life. So if you need something after you watch this presentation, please feel free to reach out and contact me. If you are interested in PC, know that I am always willing to sit down and Zoom with you. If I'm in the St. Louis area, which I am somewhat frequently, I will never not come sit and meet with you at a Starbucks, a Panera. I'll even grab ice cream with you, frozen custard, obviously, but I'm happy to do that as well. So best of luck to you all as you go through these next coming months. Utilize your wonderful support system at Kirkwood High School. They've got such a great counseling team. Utilize us as your admission counselors, and you will do great things and land where you are supposed to land. So best of luck to you, and have a wonderful rest of the school year.